Hey Eagles fans, this is Mike Kaye from NJ Advanced Media, and welcome to the No Huddle Show podcast, where we discuss anything and everything Philadelphia Eagles. You can read our content on NJ.com/Eagles, bookmark that, and you can subscribe to our exclusive Eagles Insider text service, where we'll break news, give you insider observations, and provide in-depth analysis. Through Eagles Extra, you can send questions and comments directly to us, and we'll respond to your phone. With me today, as always, is my fellow Eagles beat reporter and kind of do-it-your-all Sixers writer, Chris Franklin. Today we're going to discuss the Eagles depth chart, our takeaways from the offseason program, and break down the most interesting battles for training camp. Chris, it's been a while. How you doing?
Not bad, man. It has been. I miss talking football with you. It's been great, like talking to everybody else who was listening to this podcast. How are you feeling?
I'm doing well. So for our audience, I know that we've been away for quite a bit, almost a month, but we're back and raring to go. I had, unfortunately, some family medical stuff that I needed to kind of see through. Everything's solid right now. And then Chris has been covering the Sixers relentlessly, so we've just kind of haven't been on the same time wavelength or whatever, but I'm happy we're back. We're ready to roll. Look, I mean, the offseason program, it's very hard to take away, information from, guys running on air and no 7-on-7s, no 11-on-11s. We'll talk about a roster move that was kind of came out of left field and kind of showed how little you could really glean from availability for 3 separate practices that were only, available for stretching and individual drills. We'll get into that. But, Chris, let's talk about this roster move. So the Eagles brought 3 quarterbacks to the offseason program. Obviously, Jalen Hurts, the presumed starter, Joe Flacco, the presumed veteran backup. And then they signed Jamie Newman as an undrafted free agent. They didn't draft anybody during draft weekend. And, we just kind of assumed Jamie Newman was competing against himself for the third job. The Eagles typically take 4 guys to training camp. And then we just presumed that he was going to be the guy taking the majority of the preseason action. Like, as a matter of fact, when I did the preseason release just Tuesday, I used Jamie Newman's picture for the article because you assume that this was going to be the guy who really got to take advantage. And if there was one undrafted free agent that you felt like could make the team, it seemed like it would be Jamie Newman just because he was competing with nobody but himself. At worst, he was going to be on the practice squad. He couldn't even make it to training camp. What's your take on this?
I think that's, for me, it was very concerning because the guy looked like, at least from what I've seen from his tape back from his Wake Forest days and what I've seen during camp, like with his arm, the guy has the physical traits to be an NFL quarterback. I mean, he's got the size, he's got the arm as well. I don't know if it was a thing where he didn't pick up the offense. I don't know if he struggled or couldn't get the timing down, but I mean, I don't even know if he felt like he can get a better offer somewhere else and ask for his release. I mean, it's a very curious move, and this team needs a developmental quarterback because you're running into the season with Jalen Hurts, who likes to use his legs. So, there's the opportunity that he could take some shots. You have Joe Flacco, who's probably either this year or next, or if he decides to come back for a year after this will be his last year. There's nobody else behind them right now. I mean, unless they plan on converting Tyree Jackson back from tight end back to a quarterback to fill that role, I just don't know what they're going to be able to do with that position. And they have to find somebody soon with camp coming up in about a couple months.
Yeah, I think people will say, it's not that big of a deal. We know that Jalen Hurts will be on the roster. We know that Joe Flacco will be on the roster. But it's a matter of reps. So for those who aren't familiar, during training camp, the number 3 quarterback doesn't get a ton of reps, but during the preseason, you obviously don't want to put your starters out there. And with there now being a 17-game season, the rush to put Jalen Hurts or Joe Flacco out on the field is kind of like negated. So you basically have this situation where maybe Jalen Hurts plays 2 series in the final preseason game or the second preseason game. Maybe Joe Flacco plays 2 series in another preseason game. But really, other than that, you're probably going to not risk either one of them to sloppy preseason action. And so, look, they need a guy who can take on reps. Like Doug Peterson and Andy Reid typically have 4 quarterbacks. Chip Kelly had 4 quarterbacks in camp. This team has 2. And, most of the young talents kind of, unless you're like looking at Ryan Finley, who just got cut by the Texans after being traded from the Bengals, I don't really know who you're bringing in to take on those reps. That's the thing about Jamie Newman. He was essentially an arm. Like, with training camp, like I got into this debate with a reader on Facebook. Basically, the reader was like, the Eagles don't have a light, a crowded depth chart. And I said, well, from a number standpoint, they do. They don't have a light depth chart, but from a number standpoint, they do, because Trevon Grimes, who was just waived injured, we exclusively reported on Eagles Extra and on NJ.com that he had suffered a knee injury and underwent a procedure. He's probably done for the year unless the Eagles agree to an injury settlement with him at some point this offseason. And then they also cut Khalil Tate, but like their numbers at wide receiver, they don't have a lot of guys. Like, sure, the competition is all there, all the guys you'd expect to be part of the competition, but man, like it's interesting to study the numbers of guys being taken to camp, because they've gone very heavy on running backs. They've gone very heavy on offensive line. But there are reps to be taken up at quarterback. You don't want a guy to have a dead arm by the end of camp. You can speak to this. Speak to this from a quarterback standpoint. Like, you can't be throwing as often as being asked and then go and prepare for this regular season, right?
Exactly. And you don't, and especially early on, you'll see the first couple of weeks, if you throw a lot, as much as the routes they run during warmups, if you just think about a normal day, they have to warm up to get their arm loose. They have to throw the routes during the games. They have to throw when they're throwing 7-11. They have to throw against 11-11s. You're that much stress you're putting on your arm. You think, well, their quarterback should get used to it. You get to a point that you won't show up in the first 2, 3, 4 weeks, but you get to the middle of the season and it starts to wear on you. And then you start to lose zip on the ball. And then that could turn into more interceptions, batted balls, and completion. So it's a domino effect. And they really truly do have to find a quarterback sooner than later. And especially if it's a younger guy, because you can get as many mental reps as you can. And I know they say it's important to get mental reps looking at the film and everything that's associated with it. But till you get onto the field and you get a true feel of the players you're playing with, and you get to see the routes that are developing in front of you, it gets a little tough. And to roll in with 2 guys, I can, for the life of me, I can't see them going in with just 2 guys. I wouldn't be surprised if they sign somebody within the next couple of weeks, maybe 2, and then have a competition back for that 3rd spot, and then somebody else goes for developmental. But they have to do that for the sake of both Flacco and Hurts' arms. They're just going to fall off if they don't.
Yeah, I mean, and we're not saying that they need the upgrades in talent, because that's just simply not there. You can argue where you would put Jalen Hurts in like the grand spectrum of quarterbacks, but like from just a general like inventory standpoint, especially in training camp, you need some camp arms. Like, you can't just do this. You know what I mean? You need, like, yes, they have former quarterbacks on the coaching staff. Alex Tanney is an analyst for them. I mean, he just was playing for the Giants last year. Sure, he can throw around, but realistically, you want to develop guys. And I think, having a practice squad quarterback who understands the offense as much as possible is really important. We bring up the mental reps, but like, they need to get a playbook in a guy's hands. They've just, I don't want to say they've wasted the last month on Jamie Newman, but they have. So, now they've got to figure out what they're going to do at quarterback. I was kind of surprised they only brought 3 into the offseason program to begin with. Jamie Newman's got to go down as like a major disappointment. I mean, he was a guy that a lot of draft Twitter was like very high on. Maybe he left Georgia early because he didn't think he was going to be the starter there, because I don't really understand why he came out to begin with, because 1 year of starting at Wake Forest really isn't going to, entice the league. And, it's one of those things where you see guys come out early and then they go undrafted and you're like, well, geez, they should have stayed. They got some really poor advice or they just made a poor decision. And I think Jamie Newman is clearly that guy.
Can I add one more thing as well?
Yeah, of course.
Another thing that you think, you want Hurts to spend as much time with the top wide receivers to build that chemistry. Because one thing that they haven't been able to do so far is the scramble drills. I mean, we've seen Hurts move around the pocket and all that stuff's unpredictable most of the time. But when you get a sense, when you have a feel with your receivers, go, hey, he's going to move to the left, so I'm going to break off my route at a certain point here. You need to get that chemistry or get that feeling, and you want Hurts to spend more time with Devonta Smith. You want him to spend more time with Rager to get that feeling. You don't want him throwing to Jamon Osborne a lot because, to be honest, how much are you going to see Osborne on the field with Hurts at the same time? So that's another aspect that they have to get that's not really going to be a main talking point, but you want Hurts to take that time with the top 3 or 4 receivers and then have that camp and work with the rest of the guys who may not make the roster or be bottom of the roster guys or special teams guys. You don't want to take that focus away from them.
Yeah, I agree. I think, look, there's a lot of people on Twitter were just like, why does this matter? I mean, I think in the grand scheme of things, to take care of your quarterbacks, you have to, you have to go through an inventory check, right? You have to be able to put enough bodies on the roster that you feel like you can manage wear and tear. And I just kind of think, look, again, not a lot of wide receivers on the depth chart, not at least from a training camp perspective, not a lot of, pass catchers. And so I think I do wonder if they're just like, well, let's just put as much time and effort into the 2 guys that we know we have. But still, it's strange. We fully expect them to add at least 1 more quarterback to this roster. If they didn't, it would be malpractice. But let's transition into that. So we've talked a lot about the quarterback position and those numbers. We've talked a little bit about the wide receiver group. Let's talk about running back, because I think running back is a very intriguing position for this Eagles team. We got to talk to Jamal Singleton, the new running backs coach, the other day, and he kind of laid it out to where he said the rotation could be anywhere from 2 guys to 4 guys. It's just a matter of finding like different attributes that players have. And if you study Nick Sirianni and the staffs he's worked for, it's constantly building around roles. Now, the Eagles are going to take, as it stands now, 8 running backs into camp, although Adrian Killins is more of a wide receiver at this point. He somehow outlasted Khalil Tate and Trevon Grimes, and I guess you're going to consider him the wide receiver of the group. So let's take him out of the mix. You've got Miles Sanders, Boston Scott, Kerryon Johnson, Jordan Howard, Jason Huntley, Elijah Holyfield, and Kenny Gainwell. I think we can safely rule out Elijah Holyfield, as much as the old staff liked him. He's just kind of there. Jason Huntley, I don't feel good about anymore, with the addition of Kenneth Gainwell. Jordan Howard's really interesting. I know the fan base and the franchise has some loyalty to him. I didn't see it last year. What's your take on the running back group?
Well, I thought when they brought Kerryon Johnson in, I thought that spelled trouble for Jordan Howard.
Agreed.
Because one of the main things that Jordan Howard was known for was his pass blocking, and for him to share his knowledge with guys like Sanders and Scott. And when Johnson, who is probably say arguably a better pass blocker than Jordan Howard and can still give you some pass catching out the backfield, I thought that was a big red flag that he may not be around on the roster. I mean, and it didn't help that Kerryon Johnson also took a pay cut to try to be more affordable for the team too. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I agree. Jason Huntley, the only way I think he stays is if he becomes the kick returner and they use him back there primarily, because he showed some flashes last year when he was at line up a running back, but I didn't see that much. I mean, but get back to the point of rotation, I think you're going to need about 3 guys regularly, like they've done in the past, to run this offense. Because as much as it looks like when in Indianapolis, what the Colts did, they used a lot of the run game's essential to there, and even when it came to the screen game. So these guys are going to get a lot of touches. And you don't want to wear them out. And Miles Sanders is still a very good back in this league, but there's still questions of if he can last the whole entire season because he gets nicked up and he has soft tissue injuries, and it's a little rough. So Boston Scott, he still has to prove. I think he still has to prove himself a little bit against other teams other than the Giants. So there's a lot of competition to go on. I see them possibly carrying 4, and Killins is just that wild card. I mean, he was during minicamp, he was practicing with the wide receivers, running routes with them too. He's a wild. I don't know if they have something in mind for him. He could be another practice squad guy, but I could see them bringing in using about 4. Who knows? Maybe they bring in 5 into the regular season.
Yeah, I think where I stand right now, I've got Miles Sanders, Boston Scott, Kerryon Johnson, Kenneth Gainwell, and then if they keep a 5th guy, it'll be Huntley as the returner. Let's get into wide receiver. So I brought up their numbers. We'll add Adrian Killins to the list, so he'll be one of the 9. Now you could say 9 wide receivers. They're only going to keep 6 or 7, 5 to 6 wide receivers. So what are you worried about? Well, there's a lot of routes run during training camp, like a lot. Guys are consistently moving, and you're going to have injuries. You're going to have soft tissue injuries, as Chris brought up. Typically, you want to bring in 10 to 11, maybe even 12 wide receivers, because when you think about it, look, Devontae Smith's going to maybe play a couple of series in training camp. Same with Jalen Reagor. Greg Ward really doesn't need to play in the preseason. Travis Fulgham probably doesn't really need to play in the preseason. So that's 4 guys right there that don't need to play in the preseason. So then you're down to J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, Jamon Osborne, the undrafted rookie, John Hightower, Quez Watkins, and then Adrian Killins. So that's 5 guys. And if you have an injury or two, you've got really low numbers. Now, that said, they do have some former wide receivers at tight end, like Hakeem Butler. And Caleb Wilson can play wide receiver as well, but it's just a weird number count. Obviously, there's a report out that they're going to sign Michael Walker, former returner and receiver for the Jaguars. He'll be kind of a camp body, maybe make the practice squad. So let's talk about it like it's 10, okay? So you've got Devontae Smith, Jalen Reagor, Greg Ward, Travis Fulgham. I think the 4 of those guys are going to make the roster for sure. As much as Greg Ward is just a slot receiver, I think they value his leadership. I think they value his intelligence. Then from there, if they keep 6, you've got John Hightower, Quez Watkins, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, Jamon Osborne, Adrian Killins, and then Michael Walker. So those are 6 guys competing for 2 spots. How do you see the wide receiver group shaking out, Chris?
Well, I agree with you when it comes to Ward. I think it's funny to say this, but he's kind of like the old guy of the group now. He's so young.
And he's
cheap. and just given this team's cap situation, that they need guys like that. But I agree with you. Smith, Fulgham, Reagor, Ward, those are your top 4. Whiteside, see, I'm afraid of this is going to be the trap in camp again. Everybody's going to, myself included, are going to see these sideline catches that he makes, and he toe taps, and think, hey, you know what? It's a new crew, it's a new coaching staff. He's going to finally figure it out, and then we're just going to be setting ourselves up for disappointment later. I know they're playing him in the slot a little bit more. Maybe they think he's going to be like a Jason Avant type guy with his sides in the middle. But given that you're going to have Ward in there, you're going to have. You may see Fulgham and Reagor. I think they're talking about Reagor. He's a Reagor more in the slot. I don't see how he's going to be able to sneak in there. And then you got to look at the special teams aspect. Is he going to be a good enough player on special teams that warrants him taking the spot? And I just don't see that. I think Watkins is the 5th wide receiver. Or I think especially I believe it was that Cardinals game. He looked good. I still see there's a lot of potential with him, and he was just banged up last season. So if he, it's shame we're saying this a lot with this team, but if he remains healthy, I think he can give you a lot. If that final spot, I mean, all's been good. I'm a little intrigued by all's been Jackson. I don't know about Jackson, so it is going to be tough. Hightower, I think. This is a make or break year for. He can't continue to drop balls like he did, catchable balls. His speed's intriguing, but if he continues to drop balls, it is I think it's curtains for him. And a second round pick versus a 6th round pick, I think they would rather lean toward Arcega-Whiteside over Hightower. But it's going to be a fun battle to watch. It's going to be fun to see how much these guys have learned and progressed over this offseason.
Yeah, see, so they brought in Smith, and when they drafted Smith, I thought that was a really bad sign for John Hightower, because John Hightower is really just a Z receiver. He needs space. He's not very strong. He's a guy who can just burn. But like when you have Smith, Rager, Quez Watkins, who can all play, who can all be deep shot guys, Hightower needs to add an element to his game. He also needs to play special teams this year. He and Quez Watkins didn't play on special teams last year. There's absolutely no way that happens this year if they're going to make the squad. Like you said, JJ Arcega-Whiteside needs to see where he's at. Adrian Killens to me is appealing, but he's more of like a long-term play. I'd put him on the practice squad, whether he plays well or not. I just think you've got to develop his hands. You've got to develop his route running. I know he caught a lot of balls out of the backfield at UCF, but playing wide receiver is a lot different than catching balls out of, in the flat. So moving to tight end. Okay, so Zach Ertz is still here. It's surprising. I get why they didn't trade him during the draft, especially if you weren't getting the return you wanted, but he's taken up $8.5 million that you could realistically have to use to do something, a little bit more interesting and impact your roster. Maybe it's upgrading the cornerback position. Maybe it's upgrading the defensive line. Could be that, you're upgrading the quarterback position potentially. I mean, look, there's $8.5 million can make a lot of things happen, and more money, better depth chart. You know what I mean? Not more problems. And look, I mean, if you don't feel like you're getting what you want from him, I know for a fact that they've discussed player for player deals in the past, but the market's dwindling. The available cash for teams is dwindling. I just don't know if you're supposed to be I just look, if he doesn't want to be here, and I get it, he's a franchise cornerstone, why are we talking about value here, right? I mean, look, he's done enough for this team. I know a lot of people are like, well, trade him for a third or nothing. I mean, it's still an unknown player. If you can get another player for him, maybe you can sell the upside of it all. But yeah, for me, I just, Zach Ertz, if they're going to head towards divorce, he cannot show up in training camp. They kind of avoided a scary situation for Ertz returning for mandatory minicamp and potentially risking injury. Ertz's play last year did not warrant $8.5 million. At this point, I believe he's the 3rd highest paid player on the team. And just with the way this team is going, it just doesn't fit. And sometimes you have to make tough decisions, but it is what it is. Look, Zach Ertz will forever be a legend in Philadelphia. He'll always be remembered. He'll probably have his jersey retired at one point. 86 probably won't be available after this. But, it's time. Dallas Goedert is in the final year of his deal. If you're going to pay him, you've got to figure out where he's at as the number 1 tight end. And then behind that, there's a mixture of project players and afterthoughts. So Hakeem Butler, a wide receiver turned tight end. Jason Kroom, who has been on multiple practice squads, but has seen some occasional action. Tyree Jackson, who you mentioned before, quarterback turned tight end. Jack Stahl, an undrafted tight end from Nebraska. And then Caleb Wilson, the son of Chris Wilson, the Eagles' former defensive line coach who played on special teams last year. What's your thoughts on tight end?
Well, first off, thank you very much for giving me the thought way of saying more money, more problems. Now I have images of Howie Roseman and Andy Weidel now in red suits singing around with thanks. So with Biggie. So thanks for that. Overall, when it comes to tight end, yeah, you're right. When it comes to Zach Ertz, there's no way he can come back because the first, they're going to endure all the questions. Or you're going to if the situation if he does come back, why did you do that? Why did you want to leave there? It's just too much of a circus and distraction to go around there. So you got Goddard's going to be your tight end one. Stoll intrigues me. His production in college, Nebraska, was all right. I thought it was okay, and given how much sometimes his team likes to use a Sirianni and the Colts use the two tight end personnel sets, I think he fits well, and I think he's a better blocker than a lot of these other guys that are available because you have like Butler and Jackson, and other guys that are converted to playing this position. And then when it comes to Wilson, to me, Wilson scares me because he, like you say, he's a special teams guy. I mean, I remember watching that one. He was doing the one-on-one blocking drills, and it scares me. So unless he's going to be another special teams contributor, nah. Kroom, I really think Kroom could be a guy who's that third tight end that they keep. I thought he did well for the role that he played last year, so I wouldn't be surprised at. And then you got Richard Rodgers still lingering around, and like you mentioned earlier today, that the Eagles have about $4.9 million available in their cap space. Bringing a guy like them, if he's willing to come back, say for a 1-year deal that's within there, I think that might be the route to go. But it's certainly they may be big on numbers, but when it comes on talent behind Goddard, it's just a lot of question marks that are sitting there.
Yeah, I mean, I think tight end's a weird spot. I think Richard Rodgers is a potential bring back now that the Eagles have 3 open spots on their roster. One will obviously go to Michael Walker. It's interesting to watch them do something interesting the second we're done with this podcast. That's part of the reason why we haven't been able, to record very often, because we're just waiting for the next shoe to drop. But let's move to the offensive line. This is a big group. I'm not going to name everybody. Here's what's set. Isaac Seumalo at left guard, Jason Kelsey at center, Brandon Brooks at right guard, who looks phenomenal, by the way. Lane Johnson at right tackle. Backup right tackle is Jack Driscoll. Backup right guard is likely to be Nate Herbig. Backup center is likely to be Landon Johnson. Backup left guard is likely to be Sua Opeta. From there, you got Matt Pryor, Ross Pierschbacher, Brett Toth, Little Raven Clark, and some other guys fighting for spots. But the real prime spot that we're paying attention to, and we'll get into it a little bit later, is obviously Jordan Milada versus Andre Dillard. We spoke to Jeff Stoutland on Wednesday. He confirmed there is most definitely a competition there and that nobody really has an edge. What's your outlook on the offensive line right now? Can this group bounce back?
I think they can. And when you have those 4 guys that play together in Seumalo, Kelsey, Brooks, and Johnson, they know each other's idiosyncrasies. They know which way to slide. They're used to knowing how they're going to field the double teams. And when they're together, they're very good, and they can keep quarterbacks clean. They kept Wentz clean when they were played well and they were intact before guys started falling down to injuries. So their experience, Stoutland's done a good job bringing those guys together and being prepared week in and week out. So this unit will play better than it did last season because you'll have everybody available and ready to go. The depth part, I think one of the byproducts of having so many injuries, which they got to see a lot of guys get time and experience, which I think was key. You look at Driscoll, who I thought he played well at right tackle when he was inserted there. He gives you some positional flexibility because he can also go to guard in the bench, but you really don't have to do that because you have Herbig, who's able to play left and right guard. Some of these other guys, I think Opeta, I thought he played better as the season went on. I was really skeptical of his play early on, but I think the more and more he got a feel for the game, more experience he got, I thought he was all right. So this, to me, this is the deepest part of this team. There's a lot of there's a lot of talent and flexibility and positional interchangeability that you can go with all these guys.
So let's move to the defense, where there's like a hodgepodge of like hybrid players that we don't really know who's lining up at what really at this point. Even JG, Jonathan Gannon, the defensive coordinator, has kind of hinted at not really having a set group. I don't buy that personally. I think he knows what he wants to do. I think he just wants to figure out and affirm what those spots are in training camp. Like, he knows what he wants to do. I mean, it would be asinine to think otherwise, but they're not going to fall prey to, hey, this is our scheme, this is what we're going to do. Maybe it's they change a few things and create some wrinkles, but the starting defense, we expect them to stick with a 4-3 base. And in that case, the starters will be Derek Barnett and Brandon Graham at defensive end, Fletcher Cox at defensive tackle, Javon Hargraves at nose tackle. And then they have a really strong second platoon of rotators. At defensive end, they have Ryan Kerrigan and Josh Sweat. At defensive tackle, Hassan Ridgeway, Milton Williams. I mean, they're going to have some really good depth here. They've also got the rookies like Marlon Tupu, Mr. T. Mr. T, T.Y. McGill gave them some quality snaps. I don't know if he's really a favorite to make the roster. They drafted guys like Teron Jackson and Patrick Johnson, who are kind of hybrid linebacker defensive ends. Raekwon Williams was a guy that appealed to a lot of draft Twitter before. They recently signed Willie Henry, who's been out of the league for a bit. What's your overall take on the defensive line?
Another deep position for this team. I really like the defensive end pairings. I think you get Kerrigan in there with a lot of young guys. You still have Brandon Graham, who still plays well. Barnett, for him, this is make or break. If he wants to get that big contract next year, he has to prove that he's able to bounce back. And I think given that the depth they have at this position, they don't have to put him out there as much, which keeps him fresher, which increases his production. So I'm completely cool with that. But yeah, I'm actually really high on seeing how Teron Jackson does in this season. I think he can contribute in a big way and give some edge rushing. Inside, you have another case where it's really top heavy. I think you got Fletcher Cox when you get there and Javon Hargrave. And I like Hassan Ridgeway. I think when you include him in there, you got a good 3-man rotation. When it comes to, I'm curious to see how they're going to use Milton Williams. I know he can play D tackle and DN. I think he's more to fit a defensive tackle, and I'm curious. He's got the speed and the power to be inside, which is going to be is great, because if you got another player who's as strong as the bench press numbers he put up and the strength he has, I mean, you got a guy on the inside that can push back guards and push that pocket back into a quarterback. I tell you from experience, it makes you give you some happy feet. So it's good that they have that. I mean, I think Ty would be probably the fourth guy in there. Raekwon Williams, I think he's more of I think he's more of a 3-4 guy, but he gets me back. I mean, short yardage, he's a good player there. But overall, I think this is another very deep position, defensive group.
So we move on to linebackers. As we mentioned, they're kind of hybriding it up. Jaquan Bailey is built like a linebacker. There are reports out there that Jannard Avery and Joe Osman could move to linebacker, which would be interesting. They'd probably play the Sam role. Ryan Kerrigan has obviously played a lot in 3-4 defenses as an outside linebacker. That's intriguing. But as far as the overall linebacker group, you look at Sean Bradley, TJ Edwards, Alex Singleton, Jacoby Stevens, Rashad Smith, Davian Taylor, and then Eric Wilson, who's going to be leading the charge at Mike and Will linebacker. When we were at practice the other day, Eric Wilson and TJ Edwards were the nickel linebackers, which was a little surprising because you would think that Alex Singleton would be better in space than TJ Edwards. That could have been a red herring. I fully expect if they do have a traditional 4-3 front, the base would be Wilson at Will, TJ Edwards at Mike, and Singleton at Sam. And then, depending on the situation, maybe they would do either Edwards or Singleton with Wilson. But Wilson's being pegged as the guy. He's coming off a really solid season with the Vikings where he had 3 interceptions and 3 sacks. He's clearly going to influence the game on passing downs, which is something they've needed at linebacker for a very long time. He signed to a 1-year prove-it deal, but perhaps he could be kind of an Alshon Jeffrey-like case where he could earn an extension after a really positive start. But they're liking what they're seeing from him from a leadership standpoint. We looked at last year's draft picks, Davian Taylor and Sean Bradley. They're going to have to compete to make this roster. I think they have a good shot. Jacoby Stevens is another guy who I'm intrigued by, who's more of a hybrid player. But if Patrick Johnson and, Osman and Avery are moving to linebacker, this is a really, crowded group, not from a talent standpoint, but from a number standpoint. So it'll be interesting to see how that competition shakes out. What do you think about linebacker?
Well, I think the one thing, because these guys are so light, they went athletic and for speed for more coverage reasons. And I think that's why they beefed up along the defensive lines to try to keep these guys free from being absorbed by the linemen. They're very, I like the athleticism of this group. I mean, a lot of these guys, I look at a guy like Wilson, I look at a guy Singleton. These guys can move from sideline to sideline and they have the speed. So that's a very, very good. I think that's a very good attribute. I'm still worried about the run defense when it comes to them. And it looked like at times, because of their size, they absorbed a lot of those blocks. They weren't able to get off of them. And that's where you start to see 4, 5, 6 yard chunks at times. This defense, they couldn't get off the field. Overall, I think we look at, I like having Wilson, Singleton, and I like Edwards as a Sam for myself. I think I like him as a Sam on there, because I don't think you can take him off the field, because I think Singleton's better in coverage than you have there. But Jacoby Stevens is real interesting, and I really wonder if he's the new big nickel type of guy, and they put him at linebacker just for that reason. So, and they play a little bit more 4-2-5, and even though he'll be the quote unquote fifth guy, it's real interesting. You can use, because of his skill set and his size, I think you can use him in so many different roles. And I wonder what Gannon had. I think Gannon might have has a little special package that's for him to use him in different things. So he may hold that close to the vest. I'm really, really intrigued by Stevens, but it's a very athletic group.
Yeah, I think that's very clear. So we'll go to the defensive backs, and this group, again, crowded, but for number purposes in training camp. I mean, you look at the cornerbacks, you've got Darius Slay, Zech Mcpherson, Josiah Scott, Nate Maters, Avonte Maddox, Craig James, Lavert Hill, Michael Jacquet, Shaquille Taylor, and Kayvon Seymour. Look, Darius Slay is going to be the number one. Avonte Maddox is probably going to play in the slot. They seem to like Craig James a lot more than we do. Zech Mcpherson's intriguing, but I don't know if he's going to start off the bat. They did interestingly give him number 27, which I found kind of an eye-opener. Look, I think there's no question this group needs to have an upgrade at the number 2 cornerback spot. I like a group of Slay, Steven Nelson, Avonte Maddox, Craig James, Michael Jacquet, and Zech Mcpherson over a group of Darius Slay, Craig James, Avonte Maddox, Zech Mcpherson, Michael Jacquet, and Kayvon Seymour, or Josiah Scott. So yeah, I mean, then you move to safety, Anthony Harris. Rodney McLeod might not be able to play right away because of his ACL surgery. You've got Kayvon Wallace, who would probably take McLeod's spot in the lineup if he couldn't play. Marcus Epps, Graylin Arnold, Andrew Adams, Elijah Riley. That group's a little bit better set up, I think, depth-wise than we probably give them credit for. mainly because of the addition of Anthony Harris. So what's your take overall in the secondary?
You're right. The safeties positions is, in my opinion, I feel more comfortable with what they're going to be rolling out with. The cornerback really it really scared me because not only do you have the height, I know height, everybody says, like, well, it's more about leverage and speed. I'm still worried about those 50-50 balls, especially with some of those receivers. You have like guys like Amari Cooper, you got CeeDee Lamb, all these guys in this division, McLaurin. I'm worried about them going up against the cornerbacks going against them. Slay, I have no problems with. I think he still is one of the on a top tier cornerbacks in this league. I don't think he's like a top 3 or 4, but I think he's definitely a top tier guy that's included with them. It's when it comes to the nickel and it comes to that second cornerback, it's going to be interesting on there. Remember how high everybody was on Jaquette? I mean, remember last year? So Jaquette, I have questions when it comes to him. I don't feel that comfortable. I was a little worried about the way how he came out, his stance a little bit early on, and it continued on in his injury. So I'm not really. I'm still really concerned about this cornerback group, and there's still time. I mean, it's past June 1st, so there's still a lot of guys out there. You mentioned Nelson, who I'm also very high on, but if they don't find something to some person to address that second corner, it might be a long year in that secondary.
So special teams, the familiar faces, obviously kicker Jake Elliott, long snapper Rick Lovato. Elliott's got to bounce back from having a pretty blah season last year. They've got Aaron Cepas, who's going to replace Cam Johnston. I still find it hilarious that they have not given him any competition, but that's been their way for the last 3 or 4 years. So there it is. So that's the roster. They're at 87 players. And, they have one exemption with your guy, Matt Leo. I guess technically they have 88 players with that exemption. So what's the roster battle that you're most looking forward to?
It's definitely left tackle. But for me, it's a fact between Jordan Milada and Andre Dillard. I looked at. I will say this: I thought it was open and shut. Open shut is Milada's to give, and for all I know, it could be all lip service. But Dillard just seems like a whole different person now. And he didn't look like he had a lot of that fire, that nastiness you wanted in your left tackle. The guy who you put out there, say, you know what, I'm not letting you get to my quarterback. I'm protecting his blind side. You're going to stay in front of me, or I'm going to drive you to the ground, get a pancake, put some syrup on you. He didn't seem to have that type of nastiness. So and I think Milada did. But his mindset, the fact that he mentioned to us when he talked to us that he basically has turned out social media, that he's looking to just improve overall. He has a new appreciation for the game. I think physically he had the tools. It was just his mentality and how he approached the game that had a lot of people questioning him. And I look at it, I still think Milada wins out this battle, but if he's able to perform at the level that he is capable of, I think he could become a very good trade chip for his team to maybe get that corner that they're looking for. I mean, what battle do you think is going to be really intriguing?
I mean, I'm still trying to figure out cornerback. Cornerback is something else. I mean, it's a glaring need. It was their biggest need entering the draft, in my opinion, and their only, solution was a 4th round pick. Now, I've said it before, I'll say it again. They wanted the 2 cornerbacks in that top 10. But the fact that they weren't able to kind of address that situation is really kind of perplexing. So I just want to see and know who's going to be the number 2 guy opposite Darius Slay. If it's Craig James, you don't feel good about it. If it's Zech Mcpherson, sure, it's cool to take your lumps while he develops, but again, you don't feel good about it. Michael Jaquette, same thing. So make sure you guys sign up for Eagles Extra so you can ask questions to Chris and myself over the next couple of weeks. I know we're in kind of the dead period, but we love interacting with you guys. You can sign up for Eagles Extra at NJ.com/text. We're still having a bunch of fun. We do weekly Q&As on Fridays. You can also subscribe to our podcast. Please do on any podcast platform that you use. We're available. We're also available on YouTube. Chris, I think as we enter this period of nothing, it's important to kind of keep perspective in the fact that, look, this is a new staff, this is a young staff, and this is a young roster. It's going to be interesting to see how guys come back in shape or lack thereof. What's your final thoughts on this roster?
It's a very young roster, and it has a lot of potential. It's going to be there's a lot of question holes, and you expect that with a team that finished last in the division. But there's a lot of hope, and it's going to be key to see how this coaching staff develops. That's basically their main goal for this first year. I want to see is their ability to be teachers, not just so much as, hey, they're XOs. I want to see their ability to be teachers and how to get the most out of these young guys, because they're going to be core pieces for these next couple of years as they're trying to rebuild this thing. So I want to see how much the leap that these guys are able to make from OTAs to training camp, and then from training camp into the season and beyond, to be able to look at when the season's over and go, hey, you know what? We saw this guy, he was rough around the edges, and all of a sudden now we think he could be a contributor in the future. So I want to see how well this coaching staff teaches the players and develop them. I mean, what about you?
Well, look, I think it's interesting. Howie Roseman said after the draft that there's more than one way to skin a cat, which I don't really understand that adage at all. But so I get the vibe that they're not done adding to this roster, and so I'm intrigued by what could come. So for Chris, I'm Mike. We'll talk to you really soon. Thanks for listening to the No Huddle Show podcast.
Can you hear purple? Listen to turquoise? What's the sound of a rainbow? Let's get real. Trying to sell TVs with audio is pretty dumb, so listen to me, Joel McHale. All we want is great-looking TVs with our favorite features, like the quality of Dolby Vision IQ, the smarts of Android TV, and the vibrancy of Quantum.Color. TVs like the Hisense ULED series. Visit Hisense.com and see for yourself. Hisense. Let's get real.
Acast powers some of the world's best podcasts. Here's a show we recommend.
I'm Ned Fulmer.
And I'm Ariel.
We're from The Try Guys, and we have a new podcast called Baby Steps. It's an irreverent parenting podcast, because parenting is not perfect.
We just had a newborn, baby Finn.
I got pooped on. Ariel has pink eye.
I don't have pink eye.
We talk to some experts. We even bring you 4 a.m. thoughts from our garden.
Oh my gosh, it's literally 4 a.m.
Just to go back here, I thought I got poop in my eye.
Yeah.
And that causes pink eye.
Parenting is a mess. We're a mess. You're a mess. Join us every Sunday. Listen to Baby Steps on Acast or wherever you get your podcasts.
Acast recommends.